once the medical team leader had determined that it would be unlikely that they were going to be able to establish IV access, that was when we halted the execution.
Our top story tonight, Thomas Eugene Creech is still alive. Creech, the longest-serving death row inmate in Idaho, was set to be executed by lethal injection in Boise this morning. But the medical team could not establish an IV line, rendering the execution unable to proceed. So as a result, the death warrant for Thomas Creech will expire. In a press conference following, Idaho Department of Correction Director Josh Tewalt and members of the media gave testimony of what happened inside the execution chamber.
Mr. Creech spent the entirety of the evening up until about 5:15 this morning with his attorneys as well as his wife, Leanne.
Creech was brought into the execution room at 10 a.m., strapped onto a gurney. He was then moved onto the execution table and strapped down by 10:03. Once he was on the table, he was covered with a white blanket.
That's when he made eye contact with his family. He waved to his witnesses on that room there. He waved, and again, like Rebecca mentioned, you could just see his fingers move there.
The medical team tried to find a vein to lethally inject Creech through an IV. They took several steps to prepare his right arm.
They used devices including like a laser device or an infrared device, a vein finder tool. They used a hot compress. They attached a blood pressure cuff that they inflated to try to get the veins to distend.
By 10:13, the medical team could not find a proper vein in his right arm. They then tried his right hand, his left arm and hand, and then his legs. After a total of 8 attempts, a successful vein could not be found. Throughout the process, Creech would sometimes mumble.
There was another point at 10:32 where I was able to make out what he was saying to his witness room there. It appears that he said, "I love you."
At 10:54, Creech lifted his head, looked at the medical team, and told them his legs hurt. They tried to lift his legs to apparently relieve some of his discomfort. At 10:57, Director Josh Tewalt and Warden Timothy Richardson quietly spoke with the medical team. At 10:58, Warden Richardson announced the execution would be halted because of the inability to find a successful IV site. Rodriguez said the medical team was nervous during the process and their hands could be seen trembling. Now, the state is still considering the next steps. Thomas Creech has already been on death row for more than 40 years after beating an inmate to death in Ada County. He was initially in prison in 1974 after a double murder conviction. He has admitted to killing at least 26 people across the country. Local News 8's Ashley Chilcutt has a brief overview of the lethal injection procedure and is getting answers from a legal expert on what will happen next. Ashley?
Todd, I spoke with attorney Randy Neal, and he says many factors went into the decision to halt today's execution.
I feel sorry for everybody that's involved. That's just, it's kind of unthinkable.
Prosecuting attorney Randy Neal reacts to the news of the failed execution. Using his judgment and past experience in the medical field, he says the volunteer team administering the lethal injection did all they could before calling off the procedure.
In my first career, I actually was a paramedic for 17 years, so I know that there are certain patients that it can be very, very difficult to get a vein. I think the medical team would have had to have a very, very strong conviction that that IV cannot be established because, again, emotionally, so many people have had to prepare for this day.
Lethal injections are typically administered using 3 chemicals which enter the bloodstream through IV.
The first step is to make sure that there's no feeling. So they apply an anesthetic that will take away any pain or feeling. The second would be to paralyze the body, and then the final dose would be to stop breathing. And when those 3 are administered together, then death would recur pretty quickly. In order to do that, you've got to establish a way of getting those chemicals into the body.
Without an IV access to the vein, there is no way to inject the chemicals properly. However, Idaho does have a backup plan. The state approved the use of a firing squad for execution in July of last year. This serves as a secondary method of execution, especially when the state cannot obtain lethal injection chemicals. But the wording of the statute did not quite anticipate this scenario.
It's kind of interesting because the statute was written that if lethal injection was unavailable, then it would go to a firing squad. And unavailable, it wasn't, I think what they thought it was going to be was that the drugs wouldn't be available, or that there would be some decision with the court that would say you can no longer use lethal injection. But interestingly, it's up to, I believe, the director of the Department of Correction to determine whether lethal injection is unavailable. And in this case, it could be for a different basis, which is that medically it just can't be administered in a way that would be humane.
Neal pointed out that execution orders expire 30 days after they are signed by a judge. At this point, application for a death warrant will have to be resubmitted for the 30-day period to restart. Creech's lawyers have already filed for an appeal for a stay of execution.
Thanks, Ashley. The canceled execution has one lawmaker now considering how firing squads should be used in the state of Idaho. Representative Bruce Skog sponsored a bill that became law during last year's legislative session. Idaho is now one of only 5 states that can use a firing squad as an alternative method of execution. That is, only if lethal injection drugs are not available.
Lethal injections for executions was unavailable for political means outside of our state and our control. So the backup plan was to have firing squad allowed, and it is humane and a speedy death. So as a backup, so we passed a bill to that effect that when pentobarbital or other means are not available for lethal injection, we could do the firing squad.
After today's events, Representative Skog is saying he wants to amend the bill to use the firing squad in situations similar to what happened to Thomas Creech today.
So I have already communicated with the Attorney General that I'd like to amend that bill to allow for firing squad in situations such as this, so justice can be carried out for the victims and their families.
When asked if he would introduce legislation to amend the law during this legislative session going on right now, he said there is time, but time is slim, and he will be talking with his colleagues in the legislature. Psychologists say the topic of capital punishment can pose a moral dilemma for people on both sides of the conversation. It is especially tough for parents when they must explain current events like Creech's execution situation to children who have questions about it. Child psychiatrist Matt Larson says if a child or a teen does have questions, a parent needs to be straightforward and honest about their views, regardless of which side of the issue they agree with.
The goal with these conversations is to let your children know that it matters, that you have an opinion and a belief, and that they can debate it and question it and figure some things out on their own. I tried it this morning with my own kids because I have 5 teenagers. So I told them this was going on and like, oh, what did he do? I told them multiple murders, confessions. They're like, oh, okay.
Because Thomas Creech's execution did not go through today, the state could consider implementing the firing squad. But according to Larson, there is a mental and emotional difference between a lethal injection versus a firing squad.
While the outcome is the same, it matters how it feels. So it feels different for someone to die by lethal injection than it does a firing squad. While they both end in death, a firing squad feels more violent. It can feel more personal. It can feel like vengeance.
Larson says those emotions are not healthy or ethical in the sphere of capital punishment. Now, to wrap this up, Governor Brad Little issued the following statement today about the execution proceedings for Thomas Creech, saying, quote, IDOC officials are experienced and well prepared for a variety of situations that can arise during lethal injection execution. The team of professionals at IDOC was prepared for the possibility that medical professionals would not be able to access the inmate's veins, a circumstance that has occurred in execution procedures elsewhere in the country. The competent and qualified medical professionals present and IDOC officials were cautious and did the right thing in not moving forward with the execution. My office will remain in close communication with IDOC about the next steps, end quote. Ahead of today's attempted execution, a handful of protesters gathered outside of the Idaho Maximum Security Institution in Kuna to rally against the execution.